Hey there, I'm Adrienne, transformation coach and your go-to gal for navigating grief and loss. On this show, we're not shying away from tough conversations. Let's talk about how we're really feeling and how to show up in our lives even though so many hard things have happened. Loss and grief are tough topics, but witnessing each other's pain and getting really honest about what we want our lives to look like in our next chapter is the way forward. You're not broken. You deserve happiness. And even though you might not think that's possible, or even feel like your life is over, I'm here to show you that you can feel peace, purpose, and joy again. Let's talk about all things change, loss, and grief, and how to move forward so we can create a life we love. Welcome to the Living with Loss podcast. Hey there, I'm Adrienne. Welcome back to Living with Loss. So today is Tuesday, September 10th, and you're probably wondering, why is there an episode on Tuesday? Usually release on Wednesdays. Well, the reason is that today is World Suicide Prevention Day. It's a global event aimed at raising awareness, reducing stigma, and promoting actions to prevent suicide. It's a day to remember those lost to suicide, support survivors, and encourage open conversations to save lives. I wanted to release an episode today because I wanted to have a discussion about suicide. It's a very difficult, emotionally charged topic, and it's a topic that people have a lot of judgment around. Oftentimes, there's a lot of stigma in society about people that die by suicide or the situation that they were in, the families they come from. There's just a lot of judgment, which makes suicide very challenging for people to talk about. I don't want to throw too much information at you. I really wanted to acknowledge today for what it is. It's a day about awareness and prevention. And I wanted to cover a few things in this episode. I wanted to talk about suicide as an illness of the mind. This is an idea that really sunk in for me when I was going through my grief educator training with David Kessler. I want to share some statistics related to suicide to just kind of show how prevalent it is and how much more prevalent it is if you're in certain demographics or occupations. And we can talk basic warning signs and resources for help. Now, I'm not a psychologist, I am a coach. I was a peer support counselor or peer support member when I was in law enforcement, and I was in that capacity for about 8 years. I did over 5,000 hours of peer support, intervention, or support of coworkers. So I have a lot of experience in working with people in crisis that need assistance, that maybe having suicidal ideation. I also worked as a crisis counselor, volunteer crisis counselor for an outside organization, and I'll share the story that led me to doing that. So we're going to cover kind of a lot, but again, I don't want to overwhelm you. And if you've lost somebody to suicide and you're not ready to hear this episode, please, by all means, turn it off and take care of yourself. You are living it. You don't have to listen to me talk about it and bring up everything that maybe you just don't feel like addressing today. And that is your right. When we're grieving, we have the ability sometimes, right? Sometimes grief just crashes over us, but we do have the ability to decide what information we're going to take in. And if that can be activating, to maybe not expose ourselves to that. So if suicide is a topic that is activating for you, then I suggest that tune into another episode and maybe check this one out at a later time when you're feeling more able to receive the information. So I'll start off sharing my earliest experience with somebody dying by suicide that I knew or I had a relationship with. So this person I grew up around, he was more of a friend of my brother than mine. And I was probably 13 or 14 when he died. He ran into my brother, and my brother was going to give him a ride. And for whatever reason, in retrospect, I know what that reason was. It was a goodbye. But at the time, he'd asked my brother to give me a call and, come outside and come along for the ride. Basically, he wanted to see me. And he's somebody that had some challenges with addiction, and he had some legal troubles. There was a lot going on there. So my brother calls me and he says, "Hey, I ran into this person. He'd love to see you. I'm going to give him a ride. Do you got 5-10 minutes? Come out and see him and talk to him." And I was like, "All right, yeah, absolutely." So we drive, my brother gives him the ride. And during the ride, he says to us that he loves us, which is not, a super common thing at that age. My brother was probably like 16, I was 14. told us that he loved us, told my brother to take care of me, just said a lot of like really sweet things. And that night, he died by suicide. And so when I heard the next day, I couldn't believe it. Like, I was just with this person hours before, and he seemed happy, at peace. At that age, I didn't realize, and I didn't have the education yet, that when people make that decision, when they commit to the idea that they're going to die by suicide, oftentimes that brings a peace because they know whatever pain they're experiencing is going to be ending. So I think he was in that space of total peace. He was happy, he was almost bubbly. It's kind of odd to think about in retrospect, like there were no overt signs or symptoms that he was going to go do this. So to me, especially at that age, it was a really shocking, surprising thing. But that stuck with me through my life and continues to stick with me, is that, yeah, sometimes there are, red flag warning signs. And sometimes when you encounter a person like I did on that day, there is nothing outwardly displaying that this person is in crisis and actually considering this. So I wanted to lead with that just to say that, yeah, there are sometimes you can recognize when somebody needs help, is struggling with suicidal ideation. And there are other times where they present normally, where they're the person that you always know them to be. They almost seem, happy, joyful, at peace. And there's no indication for you to think that what is about to happen is going to happen. So I say that because when people lose people to suicide, oftentimes they take on guilt or blame in that I should have done more, I could have done more, I should have seen this coming, I should have known. But again, sometimes when you encounter a person or your last words with them, there are no indications. So I just wanted to start off with that story. The hard truth is, people who die by suicide don't die because of anything we did or didn't do. They died because they were mentally compromised. Their suffering mind told them that suicide was the only way to get out of the excruciating pain that they were in. Now, again, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a scientist. This is stuff that I learned through my training with David Kessler, who's a grief expert, and through my own study of the topics and education as a peer support member and a crisis counselor. But when I went through David Kessler's Grief Educators program, I guess when I went into it, I assumed that, mental illness and suicide are closely related, which is true. But he described it as illness of the mind. If somebody dies by suicide, they had an illness of the mind, meaning maybe it was specifically mental illness, maybe it was addiction, maybe it was something else, maybe it was something that wasn't diagnosed, wasn't presenting symptoms. Either way, something was going on in their brain where they were compromised. They're mentally compromised. And that was really the first time that I took that in and received it in a way where it landed and it's true. We don't have to know exactly what's going on with a person, or they don't have to have an official diagnosis to be mentally compromised. He talks about how we're all somewhere on this spectrum of mental wellness at any given time, right? Nobody is 100% mentally well all of the time. There are good days, there are bad days. But really, most people function in this middle area of the functioning fine. Everybody has a baseline. The way David Kessler explained it was, let's imagine somebody with a pretty well baseline and they have a stressor, maybe a problem in a relationship, financial stress, pressure of school, work, some type of stress in their life. If somebody is more mentally healthy, they're more mentally well at this point, those stressors happen and there's a lot of room to deal with it, right? There's a buffer. When somebody's already struggling with mental health challenges, those same stressors can challenge their mental state. He describes it as being mentally compromised. And again, this is something that just really landed for me. And like most basic layman terms, we can all understand that. If somebody is struggling in this way, they're mentally compromised. Most of us, when we experience intense stress, we become mentally compromised momentarily, right? We've acted out in some way when we've been mentally compromised. Maybe we lost our temper. Maybe we have a little bit of breakdown, a little bit of a tantrum. There are a lot of different ways you can act out. But somebody that is mentally compromised, they have these stressors and they may go to suicidal ideation or die by suicide. Most of us, I'm using general terms here because obviously some people have more experience with this than others, but society as a whole, people talk about suicide is if they don't understand it. Why would somebody choose that? Why would somebody do that? And I think most people don't understand what was going on in the minds of somebody that died by suicide because they're looking at life through a mind that's healthy. It's not suffering from depression, not suffering from mental illness, not compromised in the same way. So we can't wrap our brains around why would they do this. So I wanted to really call that out, that when your mind is not mentally compromised in that way, it's challenging to grasp why somebody would do this. I wanted to go into stigma. People who lose a loved one to suicide, they think that, it doesn't happen to good families, doesn't happen to good people. They're putting judgment on themselves, on their own families. They feel that suicide is shameful and they try to keep it quiet. I've worked with people, or I've had people in groups that have lost people to suicide, and they've said that when talking about it with people outside of the people that know this person directly, they don't say that they died by suicide because that brings up a lot of shame and a lot of embarrassment. And you can have boundaries in grief, absolutely. You can decide what stories to share or not share. But suicide is not something to be ashamed of. Again, a person is mentally compromised, maybe they have mental illness diagnosed. It's not a shameful thing that somebody died by suicide. But again, there's this stigma and it's tough. But if people that have lost people to suicide talk about it, they will often find that the people around them or people they may have just met in these groups have experienced it as well. They've gone through similar things. They've lost somebody that has died by suicide. It's almost shocking to find out how many people, how many acquaintances have had somebody close to them die by suicide. And the only way to find that out is by talking about it and connecting with people. So if you have lost somebody to suicide, I encourage you to seek out the community that feels safe, where you could talk about it and connect with other people that understand that type of loss. Studies have shown that a family grieving after death by suicide, they receive much less support than if their loved one died of an illness like cancer. Fewer people tend to attend the funeral. The family receives fewer sympathy calls or support around the loss. There's this false belief that a death by suicide is not as worthy of being mourned. And sometimes the family that's experiencing the suicide may feel that as well. But again, when somebody dies by suicide, they're mentally compromised. There's nothing shameful there. There's nothing to be ashamed of if you lost somebody in that way. Again, I'm really wanting to just drive home the point that suicide impacts so many, and it's not a shameful thing to go through. Many people that die by suicide are not known to have a diagnosed mental health condition at the time of death, where, maybe it's underreported, maybe there's a misdiagnosis of mental illness, or maybe they just weren't presenting symptoms that had been diagnosed at that time. So I want to share some statistics on suicide, specifically in the United States. So in 2022, more than 49,000 people died by suicide in the US, making it one death by suicide every 11 minutes. Suicide rates have been rising steadily from 21 to 22. The number of suicides increased by about 2.6%. 13.2 million adults in the US reported seriously considering suicide in 2022, with 1.6 million attempting suicide. Suicide remains the second leading cause of death for individuals aged 10 to 34 and the fourth leading cause of death for those aged 35 to 44. Suicide rates are highest among adults aged 45 to 54 and 85 and older. So men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women, although women are twice as likely to attempt suicide. 90% of individuals who die by suicide have experienced symptoms of a mental health condition such as depression, anxiety, or substance abuse. Depression is a major risk factor, affecting approximately 7% of the adult US population. So I want to talk about some vulnerable populations. Veterans have a 1.5 times higher risk of suicide compared to the general population. In 2022, over 6,000 veterans died by suicide. LGBTQ plus youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their heterosexual peers. Transgender adults are nearly 12 times more likely to attempt suicide than the general population. Suicide rates among Native American and Alaska Native populations are 1.5 times higher than the national average. And it's the second leading cause of death for Native American youth aged 10 to 24. So there are some warning signs sometimes. Again, caveat sometimes. A person may be talking about wanting to die, expressing hopelessness, giving away possessions. There could be an increased use of alcohol or drugs. There could be withdrawal from family, friends, society in general. There could be some extreme mood swings, reckless behavior, all of these things indicating that something is wrong, that somebody needs help. Again, not every person that dies by suicide presents these types of symptoms. So you may not see it, you may not know it at all. But if somebody is exhibiting these symptoms, it's an opportunity to check in with them. Are you okay? What's going on? Are you considering suicide? There's this belief that if you bring up suicide specifically, that it's going to make the person want to die by suicide, or it's going to make them consider it as a viable option. The truth is, bringing up suicide and asking questions directly, which is something, again, I've learned in my training, opens the door to conversation. It doesn't make it any more likely to happen. It opens the door for conversation and actually opens the door for somebody to say that they're struggling with this and actually ask for help. So if you think somebody's got something going on, they're showing some of these behaviors, you're really concerned for them, don't be afraid to just ask them point blank. Are you considering suicide? It's a scary question. But please, if you feel that somebody may be considering it, ask it. Or enlist the help of somebody that's comfortable asking that. So if there's early intervention, mental health treatment, studies say that it can reduce suicide risk by as much as 40%. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is now 988, dial 988 if you need support, provides 24/7 free confidential support, and they connect with over 2.5 million callers annually. So it's not like you're this only person calling, asking for help. They deal with this day in, day out, 24/7. They're trained people ready and waiting and able to receive your call and provide you with the help that you may need. If you yourself are not experiencing suicidal ideation, but somebody that you love or somebody you know is going through this and you want some help or resources for how to deal with that, you could still call 988 and tell them what's going on and get those resources, get that support, and kind of see what those next steps might be for your specific situation. So again, 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline. It's available nationwide, offering immediate support via phone, chat, or text. So I was a volunteer crisis counselor for Crisis Text Line, and you can text HOME to 741-741. They provide free 24/7 support for those in crisis via text. If you're not comfortable calling and speaking directly with somebody, but you're struggling, reaching out via the text line and just texting back and forth, getting that intervention, that can be super helpful. And it's a modality that some people feel more comfortable with. They don't want to be on the phone speaking. That feels a little bit too intimate. They're afraid to do that. But texting feels more available. So again, if you want to get in touch with Crisis Text Line, text HOME to 741-741. It's free 24/7 support. I have a background in law enforcement. I was in law enforcement for 12 years before I decided to change careers. And I did my peer support training, and I was a peer support member for many years as a law enforcement officer within my agency. And suicide within the law enforcement profession is higher than most other professions. It's a very high risk occupation. You're exposed to trauma, to challenging situations day in and day out. I would say that for all first responders, there is this increased risk of suicide. So I want to talk about getting help specifically for law enforcement. I say this because if you are in law enforcement, or again, maybe a first responder profession, your job depends on your mental health. So if you say that you're struggling with suicidal ideation, you're considering suicide, or you make offhanded comments that may be in poor taste, but something like, I get why people might die by suicide. I get why people look at that as an option. And somebody takes that as you essentially saying you want to die by suicide, and they report that, at least in the field of law enforcement, I'm going to speak to that because that's where I have the direct experience. Your badge and your gun are going to be taken. And this should be a confidential situation, and maybe some agencies do better than others, but I know within my agency, whether it was a small station or a large station, you're there one day in uniform. You have your badge, your gun, you're reporting for duty, everything's normal. And then the next day you show up, or a couple days later after you had some leave, you show up and you're in plain clothes, you no longer have your badge, you no longer have your gun. Well, there's only a few things that can lead to that outcome. Maybe you got in trouble with law enforcement, maybe you're arrested or had some type of law enforcement contact at your home, something's being looked into. Or the other thing is that you either tried to die by suicide, you attempted suicide, or you essentially made comments or told somebody you're considering that. And at that point, you're a danger to yourself. And so, your gun is taken, your badge is taken. But again, you come in plain clothes and you no longer have these things that designate you as a law enforcement officer. This confidential process is no longer confidential. Now, everybody knows something's going on, and it doesn't take long before everybody knows exactly what that is. People in law enforcement, in my experience, that are suffering and need help and could use the support are afraid to ask for it. They're afraid to say it out loud because then all of their peers are going to know what's going on. And on top of that, their livelihood may be taken away from them, at least temporarily, if not permanently. If you're already going through it and then you add the stress of losing your job on top of it, there's no help, there's no support, there's no way for you to cope. If you say it out loud and then you add that additional problem on top of everything else you feel like you're already dealing with, well, that's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back if everything else already wasn't. From what I've seen in my experience, in my training, people in law enforcement tend not to express when they need help. They try to work through it on their own. They try to deal with it on their own. They don't get the support that they need because their world is going to be ripped out from under them if they ask for support. So if you are in law enforcement, I want to pass on something that I learned. I went to a therapist towards the end of my career. Well, I went a few different times throughout my career, but at the end of my career, I was seeing a therapist that she was really open and willing to talk about kind of the challenges of different professions and how she works with people in different professions. And she specifically mentioned law enforcement, pilot, doctors. And she was saying that she is willing to do a cash pay arrangement for people in these professions where if they have a review that shows that they sought mental health assistance, they may lose their job or they're going to come under, some type of discipline or review. So she flat out, when I said what I did, she offered that as an option. Do you want to do cash pay? Essentially, I'd be listed in her records as like a Jane Doe. So not using my real name, there'd be nothing for anybody to be able to pull, no electronic files, pay cash. So that way my job isn't compromised. And I would encourage you to talk to your therapist about this. And again, I'm not a therapist, so maybe somebody's going to say, hey, there's ethical considerations there. I'm not really sure, but I know that she was somebody that was willing to do this, and I know she's not the only one. So if you are in a profession where you're afraid to seek mental health help because of how that may impact your profession, I encourage you to talk to therapists before you actually book sessions with them and ask if this is an option. If you could do a cash pay where there's really nothing for anybody to discover. Because the important thing is that you get the help that you need, period. So whatever it takes, get the help that you need. If you're going to go through your insurance, so you don't have to pay as high a fee, which oftentimes when therapists do cash pay, their fee is lower than if they were billing insurance. But if you're still like, that's a little bit outside of what I can afford, talk to them about how they're going to bill your insurance. My insurance was billed as an adjustment disorder. And basically that just means that you have symptoms such as stress, maybe you're feeling sadness, you got a roller coaster of emotions going on, maybe physical symptoms after you go through a stressful life event. Really, it's just you're seeing somebody because you've got some increased stress in your life and you're trying to work through it. Discuss with them if there is a possibility of billing as an adjustment disorder or some type of subset of that, where it's not indicating that you're in this mentally fragile place where you can't do your job. Again, if you're an outright danger to yourself, actions may be taken, but going into it, if you need somebody to talk to and you're worried that somebody somewhere is going to find out that you saw a therapist, do the cash pay option, or again, talk to them about how they're going to code your visits. So that way, if somebody does review something, somebody gets a hold of these medical records, it is billed in a way that does not immediately compromise your livelihood. I just want to say that your life is worth more than your job. Your life is worth more than your job. Get the help you need. I know people that have attempted suicide that are in law enforcement, and I know somebody that died by suicide in law enforcement. And I had seen him a couple months prior to when that had happened. Seemed like everything was going great in life, got a promotion. He was healthy, by all accounts, was happy. We had a conversation at a bar, and again, no outward signs that anything was awry in his life. A couple months later, he died by suicide. And that one, it just kind of stuck with me. Like, this person was suffering. I had no idea. There's nothing, that we can do to necessarily know or prevent this, right? Like, we can't take on that guilt and that pain as if we're responsible for it. But it challenged me in a way where I was like, this is a problem specifically in my field at the time. And even though I was peer support member in my agency, I just felt like I'm not doing enough. So I became a volunteer crisis counselor through Crisis Text Line. That was my way to try to encounter people more in that red hot moment where they needed help, to try to be of a larger impact. And then also, when I got involved with that organization, I started talking about it and promoting it to people, offering it as a resource that is anonymous, free, 24/7, and totally unrelated to the job. So it's something that people could use and go to if they needed help. I feel like I'm probably giving you a lot, but I feel like this is it's an important topic. It's a topic I'm passionate about. So again, regardless of your profession, whether you're in law enforcement, you're not in law enforcement, if you're struggling, even if you're not at the point of considering suicide, if you are struggling, please, please, please get help. Whether you call 988, you text the crisis text line, you see a therapist, reach out to somebody, please. For every suicide, it's estimated that 135 people are directly affected, including family, friends, and colleagues. So, as I said before, people tend to feel shame when they lose somebody because of suicide. But for every person that dies by suicide, it's estimated that 135 people are affected. So many people are going through this type of experience, right? No loss is the same, but losing somebody by suicide, they're experiencing that. There are other people that are going through that understand that struggle. So again, find a group, find a community that is safe, that you can connect with, that understands the challenges around losing somebody in that way. Survivors of suicide loss are at a heightened risk for complicated grief and mental health struggles. This is about connecting with people, talking about your loss, having your grief witnessed. You are not alone if you lost somebody to suicide. You are not alone. It is painful, it is difficult, there's stigma with it, but there are people and resources that can help. I am a grief coach, so of course, at any time you can reach out to me. You can go to my website, download any of the resources. You can attend a grief circle. All loss is welcome, because really, in my world as a coach, it's about tending to the grief and also taking the steps of what's next, right? Creating this new world after hard things have happened. So I mentioned, right, when a friend or a loved one dies by suicide, we tend to personalize the pain. We always think we could have done more. And this is often true whether it was somebody that you're close to or even an acquaintance. We tend to think we have more power than we do. And I think this is true really in a lot of different types of loss, not just suicide. But we're left with these what ifs. What if I spent time with that person? What if I talked to them about this? What if I asked them this question? What if we did this instead of that? Maybe they wouldn't have died by suicide, right? There's all these what ifs after you lose somebody in that way. But really, you could not have done more. You could not have done more. And I'll share one last story. While I was a crisis counselor, I was involved with several different suicide interventions. And there was one that really impacted me for a while. There was an ambiguous ending, meaning I was communicating with this person that was suicidal. And, we're talking, and I'm trying to get this person away from the means of that they had chosen to die by. And, working through it, I'm asking for help by a more advanced counselor at the time. it got to a point where we ended up sending emergency services to the location where this person was because they stopped responding, and the conversation leading up to it, we believed that they may have attempted suicide. So we sent emergency services. Now, many locations, when you are a crisis counselor, they will tell you the outcome or they'll report it back to the agency that you're working with. So the agency will then tell you, if the person was in any danger, if they received the help they needed, or if they actually died. And the location this person was in did not have a report back requirement. So I did not know. So this person that I had talked to over an extensive period of time that evening, I didn't know what happened in the end. And that was really challenging for me. And I thought for a while, like, if I took the conversation in this other direction, or maybe if I asked these questions instead of these questions, or maybe if I didn't ask so many questions. And I kind of went around in circles on this, like maybe this one thing would have provided a different outcome, when the reality was I didn't even know what the outcome was, right? Maybe emergency services got there and that person did not die. That person didn't even attempt. I have no idea. But that ambiguous ending, that was really challenging for me. And it's still challenging for me to think about. And when I went through David Kessler's grief educator training, he talked about if you love somebody that has an addiction problem, he offered these 3 C's to help you understand the limits of your responsibility. And these 3 C's, I believe, extend to people that have lost someone that has died by suicide. Or in my situation, I wasn't sure what the ending was. But the 3 C's are: we didn't cause it, we cannot control it, we cannot cure it. And so if you have lost somebody that has died by suicide, whatever actions you had didn't cause it. You can't control it. You can't control whether the person does that. And we cannot cure it. If they are mentally compromised, we cannot cure that. So, really, we tend to personalize that pain and think we should have done something else, but really, we can't. It's a hard lesson to learn, but it is the truth. We can only do what we can do. And in grief, the reality is we did everything we could. So I want you to keep that in mind, right? In grief, we did everything we could. Goodness, I feel like we've covered a whole lot. I guess I slightly touched on it, but that idea of choice. If somebody was in their right mind, if they were not mentally compromised, they would not choose to have a mental illness or addiction or to end their life. They wouldn't make that choice. So when people say, I don't know why they would choose that, I don't know why they did that, or they didn't love their people enough, or it was selfish, or whatever blame game they're playing, again, please understand that when somebody dies by suicide, they are mentally compromised. If someone was given all the information and had the capacity to choose, of course, they would choose to be comfortable, content, healthy, happy, and well. But being mentally compromised is not a choice. There are a lot of things that can lead to that. I know I threw a lot of stats at you, but I just want you to understand how prevalent people dying by suicide is. It is not a shameful thing. It is difficult, but if you can find your community where you can talk about it, you can connect with others that are survivors, that understand your loss, that understand what you're going through. And again, suicide, thinking about it as an illness of the mind. The person that died by suicide, it's not like they're just willy-nilly making some choice that is super selfish and self-indulgent. No, they're mentally compromised. And again, the way David Kessler described that in my training, that just really clicked into place for me. So I wanted to offer that to you. Just consider that a person is mentally compromised when they die by suicide. This is such a challenging topic, and I'm sorry if you have lost somebody in that way. I'm sorry if you're somebody that is struggling with this. Saying that it is challenging is almost minimizing because, gosh, again, it's so big, it's so challenging, it's so difficult. But please, please get the support you need, whether you're struggling with suicidal ideation or you have lost somebody that has died by suicide. Whatever support you may need, please reach out to somebody and get it. I listed off a couple of resources, but I will just circle back to those one last time so they are fresh. 988. Dial that for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, available nationwide, offering immediate support via phone, text, or chat. Crisis text line, you can text home to 741-741. That is free 24/7 support for those in crisis, to include suicide, and that is by text. So if you're not comfortable getting on the phone and talking to somebody, you have that option to text them, or seek out a mental health professional if you're dealing with suicidal ideation. And again, if you're in some of those sensitive occupations, talk to therapists, mental health professionals about possible cash arrangements or understanding what your insurance will be coded for. Please, please, please get whatever help you may need. And if you're somebody that is grieving and you need support, please visit my website, www.adriancrowley.com. I offer one-to-one support. I do a free grief circle every month, and there are downloadable resources that could help you through challenging times. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please, if this has been helpful, send it to somebody that may need it. Really, this is all about awareness and prevention here. We want to get the conversation about suicide going, and we want people to understand that it's not shameful. It is a struggle. And so please share the episode and also subscribe so you don't miss another one. Thank you so much, and we will talk next time. That's it for today's episode, my friends. Thanks so much for joining me on the Living with Loss podcast. Please like and follow the show so you don't miss an episode. If you're looking for more grief support, grab my free guide, 5 Essential Tools for Immediate Relief from Grief, even if you don't think that's possible. Head on over to adriancrowley.com and download it. Remember, you may not have chosen all the changes or losses in your life, but you get to choose what happens next. New episodes drop every Wednesday. Until then, have a fantastic week.